The footage you are watching from 1976 was only ever shown once on television, but the memory of it has haunted some people ever since. It's a report about a werewolf figure that was associated with two Celtic stone heads found by children near Hadrian's Wall on the border between Scotland and England. Many of those who were watching the current affairs programme Nationwide at tea time on a cold February evening were never quite the same again. The audio was thought to have been lost forever. Was it cursed? Probably not, but deep in the BBC archives we have discovered the original sound from the second half of the report. Keep watching to experience the footage that scared so many people at an impressionable age. According to Luke Casey, the original Nationwide reporter, the Celts believed the head was as powerful a symbol as the cross is to Christianity. It represented all the great, deep, dark and dreadful things of man's nature. This ghastly deity wasn't just a head, it was a severed head. The Romans employed Celtic mercenaries to man the fortifications and discourage the Scottish drift south. These Celts brought their religions with them. While they varied from tribe to tribe, what they had in common was the head. Prisoners taken in battle were disemboweled in front of the many shrines, and the severed heads of the bravest and wisest were kept as a gruesome talisman. The gods themselves were heads of stone, and if there's any truth in the old stone tape theory, what more likely receptacle could there be to store up the awesome memory of those savage times? Those cold, impassive eyes must have soaked up death like blotting paper. Let's pause here briefly and look at this so-called stone tape theory that the Nationwide reporter Luke Casey talked about in his script. Well, viewers were probably more familiar with this idea at the time thanks to a ghost story shown a few Christmases earlier on the BBC. It's the curious idea that rocks and stones can somehow record past events and store traces of human thoughts and emotions. Okay, with that in mind, let's return to the Nationwide story. Well, just recently, something very strange happened in this most unmagical looking council house at Hexham in Northumberland. Two stone heads were dug up in the garden in what may very well have been an ancient Celtic shrine. Mrs. Jenny Robson told Nationwide that she'd showed them to the lady next door. A few nights later, there was an awful crash. She heard terrible screams and everyone was woken up. The next morning, her neighbour told her that a horrible thing had come into her bedroom. The lady said one of her children was ill with toothache, so she'd been in the bedroom with her, and this thing entered the room. It was half man, half beast. Of course we laughed, she said, but it sounded so horrible, something like a werewolf. And her husband came running in to see what it was, but this thing had gone down the stairs, and she could hear it, padding as if it was on its hind legs. And when he went downstairs, the front door was open, so it must have left that way. A werewolf? Padding around the Geordie council estate? It sounds ridiculous. So who or what was it? Mrs. Robson hasn't a clue, and it must be said that neither she nor her neighbour knew anything about Celtic mythology or the horrible things associated with those ritual heads. They were sent off to be examined and eventually arrived down in Southampton at the home of Dr. Anne Ross. Dr. Ross is one of the country's leading experts in Celtic studies. She's written 3 definitive books on the Celts and their culture. So it's reasonable to assume she's a level-headed lady, not given to wild flights of fancy. And yet she too claims to have had strange experiences after coming into contact with the heads. Dr. Ross said that 2 or 3 days after she received the heads, she woke up in the middle of the night. Her family would keep the hall light on and the door slightly open because her young son was a bit frightened of the dark. So there was always a certain amount of light coming into her bedroom. And she woke up and felt extremely frightened, in fact panic-stricken, and terribly, terribly cold. There was a sort of dreadful atmosphere of icy coldness all around her. and something made her look towards the door. We'll pause here because this is the point where we've recovered the original audio. So let's hear Dr. Ann Ross continue her story.
Towards the door, and as I looked, I saw this thing going out of it, and it was about 6 feet high, slightly stooping, and it was black, against the white door, and it was half animal and half man. The upper part, I would have said, was a wolf, and the lower part was human. And I would have again said that it was covered with a kind of black or very dark fur. And it went out, and I just saw it clearly, and then it disappeared. And something made me run after it, a thing I wouldn't normally have done, but I felt compelled to run after it. And I got out of bed, and I ran, and I could hear it going down the stairs, and then it disappeared towards the back of the house. And when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I was terrified.
Did you see this thing again?
A few days after I saw it, we had to go up to London, and our teenage daughter had the key and came home from school at about 4, and we got back from London at about 6. And when we opened the door, she came to it, and she looked extremely pale and terribly shaken. Finally, I got it out of her what had happened, and she had opened the front door with a key, and as she opened it, a black thing, which she described as being as near a werewolf as anything that, she could imagine, had leapt halfway down the stairs, had jumped over the banisters, and landed with a kind of plop, like padded heavy animal feet, and it had rushed towards the back of the house, and she had felt compelled to follow it. And it disappeared in the music room right at the end of the corridor, and when she got there, it had gone, and then she realised she was terrified. The day that the heads were removed from the house, everybody, including my husband, said, it's as if a cloud had lifted. And since then, there hasn't been really a trace of it.
We saw dozens of Celtic heads in our travels around the country, and none of them would win any prizes in a beauty competition. With something less than enthusiasm, we tried to trace the 2 that were being blamed for all the aggro. We didn't find them. It seems that the various people who had them were only too happy to see the back of them, and they weren't terribly worried about where they went. Well, do you believe it? Can it be possible that horrible experiences that happened thousands of years ago can somehow be imprinted or recorded in a stone head, and then sort of played back when something comes along to trigger them off? Well, I've got to admit it sounds fanciful in the extreme. But then, supposing somebody had told one of the great composers, say, that hundreds of years after his death, an entire symphony could be captured in a little thing like this, he'd have thought they were raving mad.